You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. A couple of guests that have explored these concepts, but through a biblical lens. One of those is Micah Dank. I've had him on a few times. He's written a few books regarding the astrological possibilities when it comes to what we're reading in the Bible. And just like you said, there is a way to encode it to have an understanding of what it's really trying to portray. Basically, one of the main encodings in there that Micah would discuss is that every time you would hear an animal spoken about, it was relating to a constellation in the sky, but that's just a basic example of the encoded messages and symbolism just within the Bible. But this is actually across the board in all theological beliefs and spiritual practices, that in our ancient past, at some point, we may have had a global civilization of sorts that had this one spiritual practice, and that was basically an astrological, thorough understanding of the stars and how it relates to everything in our reality here, right?
Yeah, and he's right on the money. I believe he's right on the money when it comes to his interpretations of the Bible and the astrological connections. And I was finding that in many different cultures, predating the Bible. So it's a knowledge that has been passed through and has been reimagined in different contexts. So if you have the original story, which is the story of, like you said, it's the movement of the stars through time, and how that movement, or the months or the houses of the zodiac, which were different animals, like you said, how each one related to life on Earth. And back in those days, it was very important to know that, under this sign or under this constellation, you plant. Under this constellation, you harvest. And it became this kind of whole story of the cycles of life and death and Earth.
It's like a spiritual farmer's almanac, sort of, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But it was reflected at all levels. So when you talk about like the esoteric teachings or even alchemy, it was all based on this understanding of this procession of life and death, and going into the underworld and being reborn, and everything in between. It had to do with the movements of time. So everything was like a cosmic clock. And they would obsess with the heavens and see the signs and wonders and see, the different planets, which were stars that were not connected to the constellations, because, they would move. They were like the fallen angels or the angels, because they had free reign in the heaven. So everything had a kind of reflection to this universal system or clock, and everything based on life and death and how we lived our lives was based on that foundational knowledge of how we move through space and the cycles of the stars, which, when you really look at it, you had to have studied the sky for thousands of years to understand how these relate to life on planet Earth, how these relate to the human consciousness. So it was it is like the highest level of knowledge that humanity sought out to bring us into civilization and to maintain civilization.
Now, go ahead.
And I think that's why we're here today. And this is why the mysteries, the mystery schools, the mystery teachings, the myths, the mystical texts, the architecture, all this ancient history encoded this information within it, because it was so important of the development of humanity as a whole through all civilizations. And today we're looking back at it and we don't really get it, because we have GPS, we have phones, we have computers. We don't understand that they didn't have this stuff back then, and what they did have was their body, their human form, which is the tool, the measurement device, and they had the cosmos and nature around them, which was, they believed, which is in divine order and perfection, and everything is a universal reflection of that. So all the mysteries of creation and life were found in nature and the cycles.
I mean, it makes perfect sense whenever you're looking at the connections between, like you said, some of the megalithic structures, artwork, petroglyphs, and what they are trying to relate to the stars. Do you think that ancient Egyptians were one of the last civilizations to have this understanding and this spiritual practice?
It's strange because when you can look back at different time periods of Egypt, because Egypt lasted for a very long time, thousands of years. And what I found very interesting is that if you look at the ancient texts, like let's talk about the pyramid text of Unas, which is about 4,500 years old, at least. You know, we could probably push that back to 5,000 years because it's been recorded in the oldest temples. Now, in that text, it talks about the journey of the soul and going into the stars, which is based on this motif of this astrological thing that you were talking about earlier, that Mika Dank was talking about as well. So that's a reference that's almost 5,000 years old. But we see it in that context, and it's a very mystical context. And then when you move into the Middle Kingdom, so that was the Old Kingdom. When you move into the Middle Kingdom, you start to see it more fully formed, where it's coming out into the public, where you see it more in hieroglyphs and paintings of tombs. And then once you get into the New Kingdom, and then you get into the kind of like the Greek period, you see it kind of merging with other civilizations in that area, the Mediterranean area. You also see it in Babylon, you see it in Samaria, in other ways, but it's all clearly the same knowledge, but just different civilizations had a different mythology based on it. But if you strip away that mythology, it's all exactly the same story. Mm-hmm. But you actually see it more coming into the Middle and New Kingdom. So yes, they had it originally, or they had this knowledge, but it wasn't very outright. And as time moved on, it became more so, is what I've seen. And also in Samaria. So I can say that if you look at the Sumerian texts or the Sumerian artwork that shows the different stars, or the Akkadian era that shows different cylinder seals, you'll start to see the same type of information that's found over in Egypt, but with different gods and different ways of describing that same common theme of the sun or the spirit moving through the heavens over the procession of time, over a cycle.
It seems that the elites or royalty or very powerful individuals at the time were utilizing the knowledge that the stars and the cosmos provided this energetic effect on our reality based on the time period and the position of the stars, and were utilizing this for many different forms of power and control.
If you had a knowledge that would be profound, let's say the movement of the sun and the moon, and you knew exactly the cycle of the eclipse cycle, you can come out in front of the people that don't know this information and say, I've spoken to God, and God said that if you don't change, there's going to be an eclipse tomorrow. And people will say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. And then suddenly the sign from heaven, there's an eclipse, and they go, oh my God, this priest or this priest class is connected to God.